I work at the Institute for Information Law, and we 2 years ago we decided that we want to put the sustainability and environmental legal issues of digital transformation part of our research program. So we have heard earlier already about Project Tulip. It's an infamous example that is well known to the Dutch participants today, because in the end it didn't materialize, but what it really crystallized was that there's a huge lack of transparency when it is about development of hyperscale data centers, that there was no national strategy at the Dutch level, and that also there was a lack of involvement at the local level. So all of this actually led to a, let's say, a poisonous brew, yeah, for the company and for this development, and then they pulled out again. Only in the last moment it was known that it is actually a Meta or Facebook data center that is hiding behind this NUMA Project Tulip. And this is more like a jump scare from Ireland. This is an official slide from the Irish electricity grid, and it shows that data centers' power is now consuming, it was from 2023 already, more than a fifth of the electricity in Ireland. Why is Ireland sometimes important? Because we cannot be sure that Ireland is not a harbinger for developments elsewhere, and especially the Netherlands are also very exposed, because we are under the top 3 of data center destinations here in Europe. And you already saw this pretty data center. I want to focus today on energy issues in the legislation, mainly from the EU level. I will not talk about the very significant issues with water, with the recycling and circular development of hardware, with the use of technology, of raw materials for constructing the hardware and so on. So we will be mainly looking at electricity-related issues, but we will not be having the time to talk about all the other environmental impacts that are associated with data centers on which AI also runs. In 2020, the European Commission had put out a strategy which was called Shaping Europe's Digital Future. And in the strategy, it made this claim that Europe, the European Union, will transit towards highly energy efficient and sustainable data centers by no later than 2030. That's in 5 years. And the charm of these the charm of this commitment is it's not binding. Yeah, it is something where the European Commission very much relied also on the self-commitments of the sector itself, which all have had made public commitments to actually be energy neutral and sometimes carbon negative and water positive by 2030. We know that there is now some backpedaling by the very large data center providers, because they cannot anymore probably keep this commitment. We get a little bit later to that. When the Commission made this commitment, they relied on a now totally outdated forecast of the energy data center electricity consumption. And they also work, like it was earlier explained, with worst case scenarios and best case scenarios. And their worst case scenario now is already outdated when we are looking at the numbers we have more recently from the International Energy Agency. So it seems that we can no longer actually build on this forecast for the future. In fact, in 2023, the Commission also stated for the first time that the increase in energy and growing reliance on cloud computing to enable technologies such as AI has already offset the efficiency gains that had been made by this sector. And that's where actually my journey started. Together with my co-author Jessica Commons, we thought, what is now the law and the policy from the EU relevant to data center sustainability in the European Union, which is a paper we have published earlier this year, and we did a massive mapping. And there's a lot of law, that is true. Some law directly addresses data centers, so that's the annex of the article in case you're interested. some of these laws directly address data centers. With other laws, data centers are indirectly also covered. Okay? But what we can say safely now is that there is indeed a first iteration of an EU legal framework on data center sustainability. However, not everything is binding, and only some improvements have been made about reporting requirements and transparency. So we are going to now look a little bit inside this. At the moment, there are rules on energy efficiency of hardware, but none of them are binding. Member states are under the recast Energy Efficiency Directive. They have to encourage owners and operators of data centers as of a certain energy consumption to take into account the EU Code of Conduct for Energy Efficiency in Data Centers. Encourage means not you have to. So that is also why this is not fully, let's say, utilized, this energy efficiency of hardware at the moment. Although there are certainly many operators that are trying hard to comply with best practices of this sector. The Commission has also adopted an EU-wide scheme for rating the sustainability of data centers, and they build that on top of new transparency and reporting obligations. So we are waiting now for getting a full report of the state of data center industry and energy consumption and sustainability in Europe from the European Commission. There is also a green public procurement criteria for data centers, which are mainly addressed to the public sector. So when public sector bodies and authorities, ministries and so on are procuring data center services, that they are voluntarily can make use of this green public procurement criteria. There are permit systems for combustion plants, but I will not dwell on them now. Yet there are issues, and they are mostly building up at the local level, because in many local areas, communities and municipalities, the electricity grid capacity is exhausted, which sometimes leads to extremely harsh, let's say, conflicts about who gets connected to the grid. From the Netherlands, there is an example that a school, that is this little blue thing, in Almere couldn't be connected to the electricity grid due to commitments that were already pre-existing to connect a very large data center that is roughly the capacity of the citizens of Almere. I'm not saying it's the fault of the data center. What I'm saying is that we are having conflicts of who gets connected, and this is something that can have real consequences for schools, for hospitals, and other infrastructures. And in Ireland, this conflict, Ireland again as the negative example, went so far that actually the data centers have started to power themselves using their combustion engines and generate additional energy by burning fuel or gas or something, okay? And that is really bad for emissions, as you can imagine. And sometimes when we talk about this topic, we should also perhaps look at what is the public's interest here in this whole dilemma. And there was a recent survey conducted, including the UK, I should say, which is not an EU country, but covering countries from Germany, Ireland, Spain, Switzerland, and the UK. And it's about 5,000 people have been surveyed. And one of the questions was, in the event of an energy shortage, which of the following sectors should be prioritized when distributing this limited energy? And data centers were not coming out quite on top. Now, of course, not everybody understands that also hospitals need data centers. That was mentioned earlier already. Yeah, so I'm not trying to say that this is an absolute outcome, but what I'm trying to say is that conflicts have to be managed, and we need rules who gets the energy if there is a scarcity, until the grids, for example, can accommodate more users. Then let's look at the rules on renewable energy. We have in the EU the Renewable Energy Directive, and there is indeed a binding but target that by 2030, 42.5% from the energy should be from renewable energy sources. This is a good, I would say, a good target. And many data center operators rely on power purchase agreements where they, for example, buy large amounts of capacity, also future capacity from wind farms, but also solar energy or any other renewable energy. And that again creates a conflict over who gets access to the renewable energy sources. Because as my colleague Hannah Dali from the University of Cork says, that if growing renewable energy generation is simply met by growing demand, then fossil fuel won't fall. It will be like walking up a downwards moving elevator. Another topic we haven't been talking today about at all, which is nice and it's new, is that currently EU law, and also, by the way, all other international standards on that matter, they allow that matching electricity data centers' consumption with renewable energy certificates with guarantee of origin. And yet, the regs do not power 24/7, and oftentimes they do not actually lead to a reduction of local emissions. Only local accounting, or location-based accounting, would give an accurate picture of the emissions associated with the energy that's actually being consumed to run the data center. Or as Matthew Brandner, a professor at the University of Edinburgh, says, the system is akin to buying the right from a fitter colleague to say you have cycled to work, and even though you are arrived by car that runs on petrol. Yeah, it's not a fair system in terms of really showing the sustainability of a data center, a concrete data center. And this energy certificate trading will probably stay with us. The survey again showed that many people that were surveyed were actually in favor of only letting new data center being constructed if it is possible to power it with renewable energy. And we also see that very large companies like Amazon and Google and so on, they are actually right now trying to influence the greenhouse gas protocol in order to keep the possibility of using renewable energy certificates as a mechanism to write off emissions, real emissions. There is a report from right now, from October 2025. The Commission has commissioned this report, and it has been tasked to assess the feasibility of a transition towards a net zero emission data center sector, and the conclusion comes across actually quite clearly. Complete decarbonization of supply chains by 2030 does not appear to be technically or economically feasible under the current conditions, which is why offsetting some of the remaining emissions with high-quality certificates should remain permitted in this area for the time being. So we will not manage without using the offset mechanisms that are a little bit cutting the corner, let's say. There are new EU rules on reporting and transparency. Data centers with a capacity of or higher to 500 kilowatt, pursuant to this common union rating scheme for data centers, they have to comply with these reporting obligations, and those of you who work in a data center, they must have come across, because the first reporting cycle was earlier this year. The European Commission will set up a European database on data centers which shall be publicly available, but only on an aggregated level. That means the data we will be able to see will be maybe national level data. Yeah, we will not be able to drill down in the database to facility specific emissions, for example, or electricity consumption. There are more reporting obligations, but as you know, also in Brussels, the wind has changed, and especially the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive and the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive have been watered down recently with the majority of conservatives and right-wing parties at the European Parliament. The reporting in the Netherlands was recently investigated by a think and do tank, I like that, called Leitmotiv, and they have been looking through the reporting figures that we have in the Netherlands. And of the estimated 160, earlier we heard 200 data centers operating in the Netherlands, 104 have submitted their report in time. From these 104, only 77 data centers actually reported electricity consumption. And out of these 27 that did not report their electricity use, 24 were ultimately owned by US legal entities. That has, of course, a tradition, because the less the regulator and the public knows, the less you have to deal with their criticism and also maybe with regulation. At the EU level, we are right now working on the initiative for Cloud and AI Development Act. This CAIDA, as we call it, will be the proposal for this initiative will be published early next year, 2026 in the beginning. And the CAIDA has 3 main targets or goals. The main one, I think, is the one in the middle. The beginning is maybe more decoration. Triple the EU's data center capacity within the next 5 to 7 years. And there is also a little bit of digital sovereignty baked into this CAIDA, which says that there should be a narrow set of defined highly critical use cases that can be operated using highly secure EU-based cloud capacity. Now, that begs the question, of course, if we triple the data center capacity in the EU in the next 5 to 7 years, if this political goal of having a highly sustainable data center sector by 2030 is still anything worth. And on the hallways in Brussels, you hear that it is still something that they feel is important, but it is not anymore on top of their priority goals, let's say, for the European Union. We heard earlier as well about the AI factories that will be built with the help also of EU subsidies. At least 15 AI factories and very many antennas will be set up. Of course, this also has to do with member states' national interests. So if you look at how these AI factories are distributed, it's maybe not always the places where a data center would be the coolest, but it's also about giving a fair distribution of these high-performance computing infrastructures to member states from the south of Europe and also from Eastern Europe. So these are considerations that are political and perhaps not in the first place mandated by the local conditions, the availability of sustainable infrastructure and so on. So we land basically in the end of the article at some key elements that EU data center sustainability policy should take on board. And one thing should definitely be to make this EU policy goal legally binding, like we have it with the Renewable Energy Directive. And that we also land on a definition of sustainability that is fair and not just resting on energy efficiency, because there is a certain risk that this will be collapsed into the same meaning. In addition, the Commission should also propose measures to manage data centers, sectors' growth and carbon footprint, and take into account also this growth in relation to the overall carbon budget and objectives for decarbonizing other sectors. Reporting requirements, we think, should actually also allow for more transparency, and it should make it possible to clearly separate the local consumption and emissions from the offsetting infrastructure like the renewable energy certificates. And finally, we would like that this is open, that we have more transparency, because local communities we need to know what the data center sector needs in terms of resources and consumes, so that it is possible to have actually a public discourse about the impact of the otherwise important data centers for local issues and at the national level. So this is the paper. We have been happy to also collaborate with a number of people who have also peer-reviewed the paper. It's the best up-to-date legal review on data center law and policy at the European Union. Thank you for your attention.